She was about to inject my son with poison, right there in our Boston home, while her secret lover waited outside with a getaway plan. My heart nearly stopped as I watched it unfold live from the hidden camera I'd installed. I screamed her name before the needle touched his skin, and everything exploded into chaos. But before I explain how it all happened, let me take you back. Back to a time when I believed love could save us. Back to a time when I thought family meant forever. My name is Vivian Hayes, and I've lived my entire life in Boston, Massachusetts. I wasn't born into wealth or comfort, I built everything I had with blistered hands and sleepless nights. After losing my husband too young, I raised my son Ethan alone. He was my reason for breathing. Every paycheck I earned, every cold night I endured, every missed meal, I did it all for him. For the boy who clutched my hand and called me his hero. For the man he grew into, with a kind heart and a smile that could melt steel. And then he met Olivia. The first time Ethan brought her home, I noticed three things. Her smile, flawless. Her voice, calm, measured. Her eyes, unreadable. She walked into my kitchen like she already belonged. Wore confidence like perfume. She carried herself like someone used to being adored. Ethan had called me the night before. "Mom, I want you to meet someone. She's incredible." I could hear it in his voice, the tremble, the awe. That soft tone men only use when they've already fallen too hard. When she arrived, Olivia extended her hand like a diplomat. "Mrs. Hayes," she said, "Ethan talks about you nonstop." Her grip was firm, but her eyes didn't match her smile. That was the first crack. But I shook her hand and smiled back. Because that's what mothers do when their sons are in love, even when their gut says wait. We sat down to dinner. I'd made roast chicken and mashed potatoes. Olivia ate politely, complimented the seasoning, even offered to do the dishes. Ethan beamed beside her, his eyes glued to her like she was the answer to a prayer I never knew he'd made. She told me about growing up in Connecticut, working in law, her love for Boston. She was elegant, too elegant, maybe. She said the right things. But somewhere between her perfectly timed laughter and her polite refusal of dessert, something started to itch in the back of my mind. It wasn't anything she did. It was what she didn't do. She didn't ask Ethan how his day was. Didn't touch his arm. Didn't glance at him the way people do when they're truly connected. She spoke about herself like a resume. And when Ethan talked, she just smiled, without listening. But then again, maybe I was just being overprotective. Maybe I'd spent so many years guarding Ethan, I forgot he wasn't a boy anymore. Still, I watched her carefully that night. Later, when I cleaned up, I found a small envelope tucked inside the side pocket of Olivia's coat. I didn't open it, not then. But the name scribbled on the front stuck with me. M. The next morning, I asked Ethan if Olivia was seeing anyone else. He laughed, hard. "Mom, she chose me. Don't be paranoid." So I said nothing more. I told myself to give her a chance. After all, what harm could love do? After that first dinner, Olivia made herself at home in our lives faster than I expected. Within weeks, she was joining us for Sunday meals, rearranging furniture in Ethan's apartment, offering to help with chores I didn't ask her to do. Always smiling. Always pleasant. She laughed at my old stories, called me Viv like we were friends. At first, I tried to return the warmth. I thought, maybe I'd judged her too harshly. Maybe I'd just forgotten what young love looked like. But the thing about masks is, they never stay on forever. One night, I dropped by Ethan's apartment unannounced. He was at work late. I figured I'd bring some soup, stock the fridge. Olivia answered the door, startled. Too startled. "Vivian." "I wasn't expecting, come in," she said quickly, stepping aside. She looked flushed, her hair slightly tousled, phone in her hand. She kept glancing at it while pretending to listen to me. Something about her felt rattled. I looked around. There were 2 wine glasses on the table. Only one had lipstick. "You having company?" I asked. She blinked, then laughed. "No, just treating myself." I smiled. Nothing wrong with that. But I clocked the subtle panic in her eyes. I also noticed a faint cologne that didn't belong to Ethan. The next week, at dinner, Olivia was back to her sunny self. Complimenting the food. Kissing Ethan's cheek. Asking about my health. But in the middle of the meal, she got a call. She looked at the screen, didn't answer, and flipped the phone over. Ethan smiled. Work again? She nodded. They're always needy. She excused herself a few minutes later and stepped outside to check on something. I followed her quietly, staying just far enough behind. Through the kitchen window, I saw her standing in the driveway, back turned, phone to her ear. I cracked the door just a sliver. I said not now, she whispered harshly. A pause. Then. No, I told you, he doesn't suspect anything. My stomach sank. When she came back inside, she was smiling again. Laughed at Ethan's jokes. Patted my hand. But my instinct screamed louder than ever. That night, after they left, I cleaned up in silence. I opened the trash bin to toss scraps, and found a crumpled note inside. It wasn't long. Just a line written in blocky handwriting. Wait until he's asleep. Don't mess it up this time. I stared at it, frozen. The note had no name. No context. Just intent. I pressed it flat, folded it, and slipped it into my apron pocket. My hands were trembling. Because for the first time I wasn't just suspicious. I was afraid. The next morning, I sat across from Ethan at our favorite coffee shop on Tremont Street. He stirred his drink without looking up, completely unaware that I was staring at him, not in judgment, but in desperation. You ever notice anything strange about Olivia? I asked, careful with my tone. He laughed. Strange how? She's quirky. I tilted my head. I mean, secretive. Closed off. Disconnected. He finally looked up. Mom, where is this coming from? I hesitated. I could have told him about the note. The phone call. The 2 wine glasses. The man's cologne. But instead, I said, she just doesn't seem fully present. Ethan softened, then smiled like I was a worried child. She works hard. She's stressed. And maybe you're just not used to having another woman around. I bit the inside of my cheek. He meant it kindly. But it landed like a slap. I let it go. Because if I pushed too hard, I knew he'd shut me out. And if I was going to figure out the truth, I needed to stay close, not just to her, but to him. That night, I lay in bed, wide awake. The note was still folded under my pillow. I must have read it 20 times. Memorized the curve of each letter. The uneven pressure of the pen. My instincts buzzed. Something inside me, deep, maternal, primal, told me Olivia wasn't just hiding something. She was planning something. I didn't sleep. The next day, while Ethan was at work, I dropped by their apartment again. Olivia wasn't expecting me, but this time, she wasn't home. I let myself in with the spare key Ethan had given me for emergencies. Inside, everything looked staged. Too neat. Too perfect. Like a showroom, not a home. I walked slowly, not touching anything, just absorbing. Then I noticed her closet door slightly ajar. Inside, under a pile of scarves, I found a small notebook. It was mostly blank, except for a few scribbled lines in the back. M prefers the window route. No cameras there. 2 doses. Just to be sure. Use the T, slower, safer. I sat on the floor of her closet for a long time, notebook in hand, heart thudding like a war drum. M, again. It wasn't paranoia anymore. It wasn't just a gut feeling. It was evidence. And still, I told no one. Because something told me, if Olivia even suspected I was onto her, she'd move faster. So instead, I smiled the next time she came over. I hugged her. I asked about her week. And I waited. I wasn't a tech-savvy woman. I still used paper calendars and folded grocery lists. But when it came to protecting my son, I was willing to learn anything, even how to turn my home into a surveillance zone. I didn't ask questions when my neighbor's teenage son, Liam, offered to help. I just told him I wanted to keep an eye on the house while I traveled. He showed me tiny cameras the size of coat buttons. No wires. No blinking lights. Motion activated. Linked to my phone. Discreet as shadows. We installed 3. One above the front hallway. One in the living room. And the third, facing the doorway of Ethan's bedroom. The guilt made my chest heavy. This was my family, not a crime scene. But I had to know. The first few nights, I watched the footage with nothing but silence for company. Olivia walked from room to room like she owned the place. Polite smiles. Tidy hands. Nothing unusual. Until Thursday night. It was 1:34 a.m. The house was dark. Olivia emerged from the hallway in a long coat and flat shoes. She moved carefully, almost rehearsed. She slipped out the side door. I leaned forward, holding my breath. 3 minutes later, the backyard camera caught her meeting a man. Not a stranger. Marcus. The same name I'd seen in the envelope. The same voice I'd heard Olivia whisper to on the phone. They didn't touch. But they stood close. Close enough to be more than friends. Close enough for secrets. He handed her something small, a vial. She looked at it, nodded, and slid it into her coat pocket. I paused the feed. Zoomed in. No label. Just clear liquid. I could barely breathe. When she re-entered the house, she paused in front of Ethan's bedroom door. Not long. Just long enough to listen. Then she walked away. I sat in silence, heart thudding against my ribs. It wasn't just a feeling anymore. It was real. The next morning, Olivia was in my kitchen, making pancakes like nothing had happened. Laughing with Ethan. Wearing that same coat. I looked at her and smiled. But inside? I was steel. The night after the vial exchange, I didn't sleep. Instead, I sat at the dining table in my bathrobe, laptop open, notebook sprawled around me like war maps. If Olivia was planning something, if Marcus was helping her, there had to be a trail. So I followed the money. It started with the joint account Ethan had opened after the wedding, just to keep things simple, he'd said. I had access to it, purely for emergencies. But I'd never used it. Until now. 3 months of transfers. Withdrawals in cash. Payments to someone named M. Carter, $2,000 here, $1,500 there. All tagged as consulting. I searched that name. Marcus Carter. No LinkedIn. No work history. No address. Just a few scattered citations and one mugshot buried on an arrest record site. Fraud. Grand larceny. Suspicion of identity theft. Charges dropped. But the stains remained. I leaned back in my chair, stunned. And then I remembered, Olivia had insisted they didn't need life insurance. That it was morbid. Yet when I dug into Ethan's financial folder, the one I kept copies of just in case, I found something odd. The policy had been changed. Ethan was still the policyholder. But in the event of his death, Olivia got everything. Not half. Not a share. Everything. And then I found my name, listed under a completely separate policy. A small one Ethan had taken out quietly when his father died, leaving me as the only beneficiary. It meant if I died first, Olivia would eventually get both. The pieces were snapping together like a jawbone tightening around prey. But what clenched my stomach wasn't the money. It was the casual, calculated way Olivia had positioned herself, to erase both of us. Legally. Silently. Profitably. And Ethan, he had no idea. To him, she was still the woman who brought him coffee at work. Who massaged his temples when he was stressed. Who held his hand at his promotion dinner and smiled so sweetly at me across the table. He loved her. And she was planning to bury him. That afternoon, I sat across from her during lunch. She made us grilled cheese and tomato soup. Wore a floral blouse. Played soft music on her phone. she said, "You've been quiet lately." I smiled. "Just tired." She reached across the table and touched my hand. "I know we had a rocky start. But I want us to be close." I squeezed her hand back. "We're getting there." She smiled. But for a split second, I saw something in her eyes. Cold. Hollow. Gone before I could name it. Later that night, I checked the hallway footage again. Olivia stood at the dining table, alone. She opened a drawer. Took out the insurance folder. Removed one page. Replaced it with another. Then she looked directly into the darkness of the hallway, as if she could see the hidden camera. And smiled. I realized something that week: fear can paralyze you, or it can train you. I chose the second. I couldn't just sit in the dark watching Olivia tighten the noose. I needed help, someone who wouldn't ask too many questions. Someone who didn't owe loyalty to Ethan or Olivia. Someone who understood how to move in the shadows. His name was Clive Benson. Former Boston PD, now private security. I remembered him from years ago when my friend's daughter had a stalker. He'd handled it quietly. Effectively. I found his number. Called from a burner phone I bought that morning. "I need someone followed," I said. "It's urgent. And private." We met at a coffee shop in Roxbury. I wore sunglasses. Not because I needed to hide, but because I couldn't let him see the fear in my eyes. Clive listened. Said little. Took notes. When I showed him the footage, the vial, the midnight meetings, the insurance documents Olivia had switched, he leaned forward. "You got anything physical on her? Emails? Prints? Just video. Hidden cameras. A note. That's a start. But not enough for police. Not yet." He offered a plan. He'd track Marcus. Get into his financials. Watch for contact. Olivia, he said, was careful, but Marcus? Men like him always slip. I agreed. Paid him in cash. Told no one. Over the next 3 days, I played the role of normal mother-in-law. I brought Ethan his favorite muffins. Laughed when Olivia told a joke. Asked how her job was going. All while Clive sent me updates in coded texts. He visited her old apartment Tuesday. Left with a box. He wired $5,000 to a new account. Offshore. Photos coming. Each ping made my stomach twist. Meanwhile, at home, Olivia's behavior shifted. She grew colder. Less performative. More efficient. She started checking locks twice. Moved through rooms silently. She didn't laugh much anymore. I started to wonder, did she know? Had I waited too long? Then on Thursday night, the night she usually met Marcus, Olivia didn't leave. She stayed in, sitting in the living room, sipping wine. Calm. Still. I watched from the hallway, just out of sight. Her phone buzzed twice. She didn't answer. Instead, she stared into the dark window like she was waiting for something. Or someone. Later, I reviewed the front porch footage. Marcus stood across the street for nearly 15 minutes. He never crossed over. He just watched. Then he walked away. The following Sunday, I stood alone in Ethan's home office while he and Olivia ran errands. I pretended I was just tidying, like I always did, fluffing pillows, wiping smudges, refilling the printer paper. But this time I was looking for something. Clive had sent me a message the night before. Check for forged docs. She may already have what she needs. I checked the top drawer first. Just stationery and some work files. The bottom drawer had tax forms, old leases, utility bills. Nothing unusual. But the locked middle drawer, that was different. I didn't know the combination, but Ethan had used the same birth year for nearly every passcode since he was 12. I tried 1989. It clicked open. Inside were 2 neatly arranged folders. One labeled estate, the other simply documents. I opened the first. At the top was a new will, not in Ethan's handwriting, and not signed by a lawyer I recognized. But it bore Ethan's name. And mine. Except in this version, I was listed as deceased. Olivia was sole inheritor. All assets. Accounts. Property. No mention of Ethan's wishes. No clause for charity. Just her name. Over and over again. I flipped to the second folder. Inside were multiple versions of my signature, scanned, pasted, printed. Some attached to property forms. Some to bank requests. One to a document that appeared to transfer my house, the one I owned, into Ethan and Olivia's joint name. Forged. Cleanly. Boldly. I staggered back a step, hand on my chest. She hadn't just planned to kill us. She was erasing us on paper before the bodies were even cold. I took pictures of everything. Every page. Every signature. I put everything back exactly the way I found it. When Olivia returned later that day, she was cheerful. She had brought flowers. Lilies. My favorite. I thought they'd brighten the kitchen, she said. I smiled and thanked her. That night, I couldn't eat. I sat alone at my table, staring at the flowers. Lilies. Funeral flowers. By now, I knew the routine. Olivia made Ethan chamomile tea every night. Claimed it helped him sleep deeper, recharge better. But Ethan had started waking up foggy, lightheaded. He blamed stress. I didn't. So that evening, while she was in the shower, I slipped into the kitchen and quietly poured the tea into the sink. Refilled the cup with fresh water and a splash of lemon, same color, no scent. Then I added a drop of food coloring to match the faint golden hue she used. When Olivia came down, wrapped in a towel, she didn't notice a thing. She added honey. Stirred it gently. Walked into the bedroom humming. I waited in the hallway, holding my breath. The hallway cam caught her clearly. She stood by Ethan's bedside with the cup in her hands, but something was off. She didn't offer it to him right away. She sniffed it. Then looked at the hallway. She froze. For one long second, she just stood there. Then, suddenly, she turned, walked back to the kitchen, and poured the cup down the drain. She didn't say a word to Ethan. Just smiled, kissed his forehead, and turned out the light. It was a test. And she knew she'd failed it. That same night, Olivia slipped out of bed around 2 a.m. The camera caught her stepping barefoot into the garage. She opened a locked toolbox and removed a slim black case. Inside? A syringe. She studied it in her palm for almost a full minute. Then she took out her phone and sent a voice message. Clive intercepted it from Marcus's burner line the next morning. It was short, a whisper. The tea didn't work. She's watching. We finish this tomorrow night. The message Clive intercepted confirmed it. Olivia and Marcus were planning to kill Ethan tomorrow night. Not someday. Not eventually. Tomorrow. I had 24 hours. Clive and I met that afternoon in his car, parked near the river. He handed me a printed layout of my home, door sensors, motion triggers, blind spots. He'd spent the day installing a second layer of surveillance. One Olivia wouldn't even think to look for. Police can't act without the act itself, he told me. But they'll be nearby. The moment she makes a move, I'll call them. We catch her in the act, it sticks. I nodded, jaw clenched. And Ethan? He can't know. If he acts strange, she'll panic. You need to keep the routine. That night, I cooked dinner like nothing was wrong. Roasted chicken, mashed potatoes, his favorite. Olivia sat across from me, smiling, talking about new curtains. Ethan joked about a Netflix show. It all felt like a performance. Like a dress rehearsal for grief. After dinner, Olivia prepared her usual tea. But this time, I intercepted it before it left the kitchen. Clive had prepared a replica, harmless but chemically traceable. It would serve as evidence later. I watched Olivia carry it to Ethan with her perfect smile. He took a sip, thanked her, and kissed her hand. She leaned into him like a lover. I wanted to scream. Instead, I waited until they went to bed. Then I got into position. In the living room, I sat silently with my phone, watching the hallway camera feed. Clive was outside, across the street in his car, alerting the backup team. 2 unmarked cruisers waited nearby, lights off, engines cold. At exactly 2:14 a.m. Olivia slipped out of bed. She wore gloves. She didn't hesitate. She moved down the hall like a ghost, syringe hidden in her sleeve. Marcus appeared seconds later, slipping through the unlocked back door, heading toward the garage entrance. My house was no longer mine. But this time, I was ready. I texted Clive one word. Go. The hallway camera showed Olivia at Ethan's bedroom door. She paused, pressed her gloved hand against the frame, and slowly turned the knob. Inside, Ethan stirred slightly, the drugged tea already doing its work. Not enough to harm him, but enough to keep him unaware. She stepped in, the syringe in her hand now visible. Outside, I could see Marcus rounding the side of the house, slipping in through the garage. Everything was moving fast. Clive's voice buzzed in my ear through the small earpiece. We're moving in 30 seconds. Be ready. But I didn't wait. I moved. I stormed into Ethan's room just as Olivia pressed the syringe to his arm. Her head jerked up. Don't move, I said, voice like fire. Her eyes widened in pure shock. Ethan mumbled, Mom, what? Olivia stepped back, syringe still in hand. I told you, don't move. Footsteps pounded behind us. Marcus appeared in the doorway, freezing when he saw me. Marcus, run. Olivia screamed. But it was too late. 2 officers tackled him from behind, dragging him to the floor. He fought, hard, knocking over a lamp, screaming curses. A scuffle of fists, metal, and panic. Olivia dropped the syringe and lunged toward Ethan, as if to shield him, or maybe to finish the job with her bare hands. I threw myself between them, slamming her backward with everything I had. She stumbled, fell to the ground. Police surged in seconds later, pinning her down, reading her rights. Ethan sat up, dazed, trying to understand what he was seeing. Mom, he whispered. I looked at him, eyes full of tears. It's over. You're safe now. He shook his head slowly, heartbroken. She tried to kill me? I nodded. Olivia looked up from the floor, face twisted with rage and something colder. You never wanted me here, she spat at me. This is your fault. I didn't answer her. I just turned to Ethan, placed my hands on his face, and whispered. I've always been here to protect you. Even when you didn't know you needed it. The house was a crime scene. Police tape stretched across the front steps by dawn. Officers moved in and out with boxes, gloves, cameras. Olivia and Marcus had been taken in separately. Ethan sat on the couch in a hoodie, silent, staring at his hands like they belonged to someone else. Clive stayed close, helping coordinate evidence transfers. But the weight of it all? That was mine to carry. A young officer handed me a sealed bag with the syringe. We'll get the chemical analysis in 24 hours, he said. But from what your investigator pulled, it's cleanly prepped. Translation, Olivia didn't just panic. She planned. The detectives interviewed me in the kitchen. I showed them everything, the camera footage, the altered insurance documents, the forged will, the note, even the traced bank transactions Clive had gathered. It was more than enough to build a case. They looked stunned. Not just because it was all so calculated, but because it was so domestic. So ordinary. Women like her, one detective said quietly, they don't stab. They design. Meanwhile, Ethan hadn't spoken a word since the police left. He just sat there, eyes blank, the occasional tear slipping down his cheek. Eventually, I sat beside him, not touching him, just sitting. Why, he whispered. I didn't answer right away. Because the truth was, I didn't know either. Maybe it was the money. Maybe it was control. Maybe Olivia had never been who she pretended to be. She needed power, I said finally. And you were in the way. He shook his head slowly. I thought she loved me. I reached for his hand, and this time, he didn't pull away. Later that day, a detective returned. Olivia's already confessed, he said. Claims she snapped. Blames your suspicion and your relationship with your son for triggering her. She's painting it as psychological pressure. I smiled, bitter. Of course she is. The detective looked at me for a moment longer. She's dangerous, he said. But you? You're the reason he's alive. The trial began 6 weeks later in Suffolk County Superior Court. The city was still talking. Wife tries to murder husband with lover in inheritance plot. Mother catches killer daughter-in-law red-handed. Boston hadn't had a case like this in years, not one so personal, so twisted. I sat in the front row every single day, never once missing a minute. Ethan sat beside me, thinner than usual, quiet, watching everything with the expression of someone whose heart had been shattered and glued back together with questions. Olivia entered the courtroom in a soft blue blouse. No makeup. Hair tied back. A woman of sorrow. A picture of frailty. Her lawyer touched her arm often. She kept her eyes down. To the jury, she looked like the victim. Her defense? Emotional abuse. Psychological control. That I had alienated her from Ethan. That I gaslit her into paranoia. That she had snapped from fear and loneliness. They spun her actions like desperation. The footage of her standing over Ethan with the syringe? Panic, they said. A mental breakdown. She didn't know what she was doing. Marcus had already flipped. His deal was simple, full cooperation in exchange for a reduced sentence. His testimony dismantled every lie Olivia told. She planned everything, he said. The tea. The insurance. Even the will. She said once, the moment they're both gone, I'll finally breathe again. Gasps filled the courtroom. Olivia never looked at him once. Ethan testified next. He was brave. Fragile, but brave. He told the court about the months of fatigue, how she'd changed, how his mother had seen what he couldn't. I didn't want to believe it, he said. I loved her. I thought she loved me. Then it was my turn. I took the stand with my palms damp and heart pounding. I told them about raising Ethan alone. About every sacrifice. Every night I went hungry so he wouldn't. I told them how I trusted Olivia, how I welcomed her, even when my instincts screamed otherwise. I didn't cry. Not until the end. She tried to take my son. But worse, she made him doubt his own mother. The courtroom was silent. Olivia's lawyer asked me, "Isn't it true you resented her from the beginning?" I looked at her. Calm. Clear. No. I resented the way she smiled when she thought I couldn't see her. The jury took nearly 6 hours. 6 hours of waiting. 6 hours of Ethan pacing the hallway outside the courtroom, running his hands through his hair. 6 hours of me sitting still on that hard bench, replaying every moment from the past year, every smile Olivia faked, every time I ignored my gut. Then the door opened. The courtroom filled again. Olivia walked in with her hands folded, her expression unreadable. Not broken. Not nervous. Just blank. Like someone watching her own life from outside her body. The judge asked everyone to rise. The foreperson, a woman with gray hair and tired eyes, stood with a sheet in her hand. On the charge of attempted murder in the first degree. Guilty. On the charge of conspiracy to commit murder. Guilty. On the charge of fraud and forgery. Guilty. I closed my eyes. Not in relief. Not in triumph. But in exhaustion. Marcus was sentenced to 15 years. Olivia got 30 without the possibility of parole. There was no gasp. No protest. Just the banging of a gavel and the shifting of bodies as the courtroom began to breathe again. As the officers moved in to cuff her, Olivia finally looked at me. Not at Ethan. At me. You took everything from me, she said softly. I didn't respond. Because in that moment, I realized, she never wanted Ethan. Not really. She wanted control. Legacy. Power. And I had stood in her way. Outside, reporters swarmed. Cameras flashed. Microphones shoved into our faces. Ethan whispered, "Let's go." We walked past them, saying nothing. By the time we reached the car, it had started to rain. Not hard. Just a light drizzle, soft, cold, and cleansing. Ethan opened the door for me, like he used to when he was little, mimicking his father. We sat there in silence for a few minutes, watching the courthouse fade behind the misted windows. "You were right," he finally said. "All along." I nodded, too tired to feel vindicated. I didn't want to be. 3 months passed. The headlines faded. The reporters moved on. The court files were sealed and boxed away in some evidence room we'd never visit. But the healing, that stayed here, with us. Ethan moved back in with me for a while. He needed the familiarity. The quiet. The space where love had always lived. We started small. Dinner together, just the two of us. Long walks along the Charles River. Sitting in silence without needing to fill it. He was broken in ways he didn't yet understand, but he was healing. And so was I. One afternoon, I found him in the kitchen, trying to make his father's chili recipe from memory. The kitchen smelled like tomatoes and burnt onions. He looked up sheepishly. "Not like Dad's, huh?" I smiled. "Closer than you think." We sat at the table, side by side, eating quietly. He looked at me, serious. "You saved my life." I reached across, took his hand. "You gave me a reason to fight." That night, I sat by the window with a cup of tea, real tea, watching the city lights blink to life. Boston never sleeps. But in that moment, it felt peaceful. I thought about Olivia. Where she was. Who she'd become. Whether she ever truly loved Ethan, or whether she'd only loved the idea of winning. But I didn't linger. Because some ghosts don't deserve room in your memory. As I sipped my tea, Ethan called from the other room, asking if I wanted to rewatch that old series we used to watch, the one we always fell asleep to. I smiled. "In a minute," I said. And then, just before I turned off the lamp, I looked out at the street one last time, and whispered. "You lost, Olivia." I'm still standing.